Welcome back in here to the week two of review show for our fantasy league. I'm gonna go over all the different matchups, go over some of the best performances as well as the duds, and then just go over some of the injury news as well. So let's first start off here with the matchup between myself, Uncut Gems there, and John. Absolutely killed it this week, 193 points, best in the league by far. A lot of that had to do with Alvin Kamara and James Cook's performances. You could see Kamara had 45 fantasy points. James Cook had 20 and a half. Each of those guys had multiple touchdowns in their games. The Dallas defense was Swiss cheese, essentially, with the Saints winning 44-19. Kamara feasted in that game, 4 total touchdowns. And then on that Thursday night game against the Dolphins, rest in peace, Tua. Uh, James Cook in that 31-10 Buffalo win on the road, taking care of business, wound up getting 20 and a half fantasy points, 3 total touchdowns. So really carried the way. And the running back room from those two guys, James Conner as well, 20.4, had a decent day, and is somebody that I could have kept in this absolutely loaded running back room with Kenneth Walker and Nick Chubb on the bench, but had to make a deal. Made a deal this morning with Barry. We'll go over that a little bit more here later on in the matchups, but I think it's going to be a pretty good fit for my team moving forward, and I think it benefits his team as well. From a quarterback perspective, Jalen Hurts, 24.82. Did throw that interception at the end of the game, so one less fantasy point there. We're not gonna boo-hoo about it, though. Absolutely stud performance from him. One of the best quarterback performances on the week. And then everybody else just taking care of their business. Wide receiver room did great. CD 19, Zay Flowers 22.1. Still tight end, as you can see, with Travis Kelce only getting 1.6 for John and Dalton Kincaid only getting 7.3 for myself. Tight end's been in position so far through 2 weeks that has been a real letdown, I would say, across the league. I know Brock Bowers, which we'll get to in a moment, had an awesome, stellar week in performance, especially for a rookie tight end. But for the most part, it's in kind of a letdown position. Hopefully, as the weeks go on here, we can start to see some of the breakout performances from some of those highly drafted positions, highly drafted players from that position, from the tight end position, like the Kincaids and the Kelce's, Laportas, etc. And then the defense-wise, 49ers defense didn't do stellar for me. Kind of what held me back from hitting 200 points, to be honest. Only 6 fantasy points from them. You're really looking at a Minnesota team with Sam Darnold as the QB. You would expect at least a double-digit performance from the 49ers defense. So a little disappointed in that, but overall, can't complain with 193 points. Best in the league by far this week. Getting the dub and moving to 1-1. Second in the league overall. Bench-wise, nothing to write home about. Baker's been stellar so far through 2 games. I think he's in QB1, QB2 in fantasy overall. It's early still, but another solid outing from him. And Jameson Williams, sophomore out of wide receiver for the Lions, has been stellar so far through 2 games. So a little disappointing. Mark Cooper still getting the targets, but really poor effort and performance with only single-digit fantasy points back-to-back weeks. Ferguson's been hurt. Kenneth Walker was out this week hurt, and Chubb's been on the IR. He's probably not going to return for a while, so nothing there. For John, on his end, probably very disappointing in that Josh Allen performance after having over 30 fantasy points last week. Only 9.76 game script wise. They ran the ball a lot, got up on the Dolphins early. Didn't need to chuck the ball around too much. So single-digit fantasy points from Josh Allen isn't great. Saquon's still been consistently good, 17.6. Swift, 8.2. Olave, 12.8. Nico Collins, absolute stud, 20 and a half. Best performance on John's team this week. Got John over the 100-point hump for the week. Travis Kelce, big letdown. Just talked about tight end, 1.6. George Pickens, a Steelers player, one of my guys. Should have had a touchdown. Should have had double-digit fan point. Easy could have touched 20 fantasy points. A lot of that had to come back due to penalties, so I'm sure John is not too happy with Broderick Jones on the Steelers' offensive line. Browns defense been stellar, and then kickers as well. Fairburn and Aubrey, both with double digits. Bench-wise, Tank Dell, single digits, not great. Singletary, decent week. Smith and Jigba, awesome week for him, 24.7. Aaron Rodgers 15, and then the rest is kind of mad there. So overall, stellar week for myself. Pleased with that performance from the guys. Got a 70, 80 point win basically on the week, and looking forward to week 3. Let's move on to Darshan and Alex's team here. So Alex got the dub over me last week, actually. Wound up having a bit of an underperformance this week. We'll go over that in a moment. And then Darshan getting the dub this week. Took the L last week on the chin, but you'll see with a lot of the matchups here, the league sort of balanced itself out this week. A lot of people who won in week 1 wound up losing in week 2. So pretty balanced league so far, I would say. So looking at Alex's team, massive underperformance by Mahomes. You got to be better than that. Only 14 fantasy points was Alex's first round pick. Not great. Ramondre Stevenson has been great for Alex through 2 weeks. Another double-digit outing for him. Najee only 8.4. Not the best, not the worst. Devontae Smith, though, 20.6 with A.J. Brown being out now for extended period of time. I think Devontae Smith will be a great asset for Alex to hold on to during that period of time. Should see double digits consistently here while A.J. Brown is out. Lat McConkey let down after a great week 1, only single digits, 4.6. Freiermuth, right on the nail for his projection, exactly 7.9. Zach Moss let down in week 2, had a pretty good week 1. I think he hit double digits in week 1, 15 or 16 fantasy points, but only had 5 this week. That Cowboys defense had over 20 in week 1 for Alex, wound up putting up a complete 0 Swiss cheese defense against that potent offense for the Saints right now that's been putting up over 40 actual points in games back-to-back weeks. So that was kind of one of the big letdowns for Alex there. If he had gotten 10, 15, 20 points from the Cowboys defense, a little bit more from Zach Moss, and maybe an extra field goal or 2 from Justin Tucker would have been a different result for Alex this week. Bench-wise, Higgins been out and hurt, and Njoku was out and hurt. Single digits. Really disappointing performance from Christian Watson. Might be a drop candidate for Alex. Caleb Williams also disappointing, that Texans loss. Single digits for him, and then Jacoby Myers only 6.9. So only 23 fantasy points on the bench for Alex. So it wasn't like he lost because he didn't start players that were on his bench. Just needs better performances from his starters. Darshan had a pretty great week. Got over 130 fantasy points. Brock did okay. Devon Achane, Thursday Night Football, did stellar, almost 30 fantasy points. Jerome Ford, a little bit of a letdown. Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. Absolute stud, 24 fantasy points. Ayuk going forward should be doing a lot better with Debo hurt right now, Debo Samuel, for the 49ers. So, and CMC's, Christian McCaffrey's still out. So I see Brandon Ayuk getting into the double digits kind of consistently here. Similar to what's going on with A.J. Brown and the Eagles with Devontae Smith getting 20.6. I could see Ayuk's numbers only going up from here. George Kittle is also on his team, so another 49er could see that volume with Debo being hurt. George Kittle made up for 20 fantasy points. One of the best performances from the tight end room, I think, all week. And then Joe Mixon only 8 points. Seahawks defense did okay, 8 points. And then Jake Elliott with kind of a disappointing 7 fantasy points, the Eagles kicker. So still wound up getting the dub over Alex, by 40 points. You can see there was actually quite a bit of blowouts this week. There was really only one matchup here, George and Pat, that was decided by just a few fantasy points. Everything else was a double-digit blowout. A.J. Brown, you could see out, had to put him on his bench. Wound up not impacting his team, though he wound up still getting the dub for Darshan. And then you have Deshaun Watson, Mike Williams, Dalton Schultz, Dolphins defense, Evan McPherson, and Alec Pierce. So 59 points from the bench for Darshan, one of the better bench performances on the week. So not too bad. Wound up getting the dub. All right, let's move over to the third match here of 5. We have Brad, who's currently first in the league, 2-0, only 2-0 team. Put up another 130 plus point fantasy performance. Been very consistent from his team so far. I think he put up about that last week. I think it was like 135 or 139. I can't remember, but great performance from him. Really solid team. Wound up having a trade with him earlier in the week. I had traded him Jordan Mason at the time. It was unclear whether or not Christian McCaffrey was going to be able to suit up for week 2 or come back week 3. Now has been put on IR, so that trade wound up working out pretty well, I would say, in Brad's favor now. I traded away Jordan Mason to him. But in return, I did get Zay Flowers, who put up 22 fantasy points, so I'm not going to complain too much. And then, in addition to Jordan Mason, also gave him Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin, who's supposed to be a wide receiver one for the Commanders, with a rookie quarterback, Jaden Daniels, isn't doing too well right now, fantasy-wise. Single digits back-to-back weeks. Targets are just not there. Zay Flowers has seen double-digit targets back-to-back weeks, double-digit fantasy points back-to-back weeks for Zay Flowers. So I felt like I needed to bolster my wide receiver corps. So I think overall, the trade wound up being pretty fair. I think he's getting a little bit of a boost from Jordan Mason now that Christian McCaffrey's out, and Jordan Mason put up another stellar performance in the absence of Christian McCaffrey, who resides currently on his bench. So you have from the starters, Lamar, a bit of a disappointing week, just a little shy of his projection of 22, only got 17. Kyron's going to be a beast moving forward. A lot of injuries for the Rams. Like you see, Cooper Kupp, only 7 fantasy points after having the best performance, I think, from all the wide receivers week 1 with 33, and is now out hurt. So injury's a big, big thing here in week 2. Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown, Isaiah Pacheco, just to name a few of the more no names. Plus some people, having extended runs now on IR, like Christian McCaffrey being out a bit of time here. So Devontae Adams, though, good bounce back week for him, 27 fantasy points with that win over the Baltimore Ravens, who are now 0-2. Haha, Brad. He's a Ravens fan, if that wasn't obvious with Lamar and Ravens. Defense, Aaron Jones, pretty consistent double digits. So overall, pretty solid effort, 136 fantasy points from Brad, first in the league. Derek, who's unfortunately the only 0-2 team in the league, currently in 10th place. Feel terrible for Derek. His team is pretty stacked. You'll see C.J. Stroud, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. Just isn't getting enough, you can see, from his wide receivers. I would say that's his biggest weakness at the moment. Running back room, obviously, 16, 17, and 16 from 3 running backs is stellar, is fantastic. Can't ask for much more than that from those 3 guys, from that trio. But, again, lacking at wide receiver at the moment. Only 11 fantasy points from DJ Moore. Had a projection of 15.6, and Stephon Diggs projected 15. Had a great week 1, but regressed back to only 7 fantasy points here in week 2. Same with CJ Stroud, a bit of an underperformance for him in a low-scoring win over the Bears. Sunday Night Football, only 14.3 fantasy points. Did well from his kicker, 10 fantasy points, double digits, and then defense for Chargers, 17 fantasy points. It'll be interesting. I know I have a matchup with him coming up here in week 3, so second place versus 10th. Maybe he'll be able to get his first win. He'll have to see some stellar performances from his wide receivers, and definitely C.J. Stroud having to get to 25, 30 fantasy points if he wants to stand a chance against me. And Evan Ingram, unfortunately, was a very, very late scratch from the game. Had gotten a hamstring injury, I think, in pregame warmups and snaps. So that was just very unfortunate for Derek. Lost by 26. Evan Ingram would have had to really, really pop off for him. Catch multiple touchdowns, have 80, 90, 100-yard game, multiple receptions to stand a chance of still even beating Brad. But I know he'll be looking at having to add a tight end this week off the waivers. Doesn't have one on his bench. Probably is a little disappointed that he didn't start Godwin. 25.7 fantasy points. Been a beast through 2 weeks. I imagine he'll start in week 3. You can see 80 total bench points. Really, that was kind of the biggest struggle, I'd say, for Derek. He probably would have wanted to start some of these players on his bench, like Godwin, in place of Stephon Diggs, who only had 7. That would have been a huge 18-point swing for him. And then again, not having any points at all from the tight end position is just brutal. So great win for Brad. Congratulations to him. First place right now, currently in the league, only 2-0 team. Fortunate for Derek. Last place 0-2, only 0-2 team. But I know he'll bounce back. 14-week regular season, only 2 weeks in, so a lot of time to bounce back there. Going to the 4th matchup, we have Pat versus George. Pat currently in 8th, George in 7th. So these 2 guys kind of towards the bottom, both 1-1 now. But in a good position, I think, to make the playoffs. 8 out of the 10 teams make the playoffs. So these 2 guys should be fine come season end. Jaden Daniels been pretty decent so far through a couple weeks as a rookie quarterback. 13.44 this week. Not terrible. Had a better week 1. I think he had over 20, I think almost 30 even. Brees Hall's been a stud, 24. Josh Jacobs, 15. Rashee Rice, 18, and his flex was excellent for him. Garrett Wilson, a little disappointing with only 10. Jalen Waddle, a little disappointing with only 8. And then again, the tight ends, 3.3 for Sam Laporta was like the highest drafted tight end this year. And then Johnny Munt over here filling in for the injured and out TJ Hawkinson for Georgia only had 3.2. This was the closest matchup this week. You see, Pat had 112, Georgia had 109, so only a difference of a little under 3 fantasy points between these two guys. Looking at the breakdown, though, it looks like the biggest difference was at wide receiver. You can see Garrett Wilson 10, Jalen Waddle 8, Rashee Rice 18.5. Over here for Georgia, though, Jamar Chase disappointing 7.5 fantasy points for the guy who projected to have 19. Same with Michael Pittman Jr., only 5 fantasy points, projected to have 15. Malik Neighbors, though, did well for Georgia in his flex, 29.7, one of the highest performances from the wide receiver position here in week 2. Kyler Murray's been an absolute beast. Still performance from him, 20.5. Him and Baker have been absolutely lighting it up so far from the quarterback position. As two of guys who, well, Baker I don't even think was drafted. I want to pick him off waivers after week 1, and then Kyler Murray was drafted maybe as the 7th, 8th, 9th quarterback taken off the board. So pretty good value for those two guys so far. And then just looking at the bench performances, pretty even there. 70 for Pat on his bench. Drake London could have been a guy he would have plugged in, I'm sure, ahead of Jalen Waddle. And then, I would say for George, Calvin Ridley, 24.7. Would have been a guy I'm sure he would have liked to have in place of either Chase or Pittman to win him his week. And overall, pretty solid performance from both of these two teams. I'm sure it's going to be interesting to see these guys, how they finish out the year, and wishing the best of luck to the both of them. Last but not least, we have Deep Fakes. We have Coach Barry. And then currently 6th in the league, 1-1, one of the higher 1-1 teams in the league, kind of middle of the pack right now. Stellar performance. What is that? The second highest overall scoring performance on the week, 144.2 fantasy points. So well done there, Barry. I'm sure you're a little disappointed with some of the outcomes in terms of now post week 2 with some injuries, Pacheco, Tua being out. We'll go over that here more in a minute. And then Group's HR partner is my pal Joey from ADP when I worked there. Decent performance from his team. I'm sure he was a little disappointed to lose, even having put up over 130 fantasy points. Hey, that's fantasy. Anthony Richardson took a step back this week, only 12 fantasy points. Running back has been pretty consistently good, I would say, throughout the league. A lot of double-digit performances from a lot of the starting running backs on everybody's team. You see that with ETN, Montgomery, Pacheco, Charbonnet. That's a solid performance. Biggest disappointment right there, Thursday Night Football for Joey's team. Actually, two performances that were a little disappointing after solid Week 1 performances was Tyreek, 6.6, and then Mike Evans, only 7.2 fantasy points. So both those guys had a solid Week 1, just regressed massively here in Week 2 to only have single digits. So highly disappointing performance from them. Great flex decision right there. DK Metcalf, 29.9 fantasy points, almost 30 basically. For DK, again, one of the higher performances, him and Malik Neighbors, Justin Jefferson at the wide receiver position, and even Marvin Harrison Jr. over here on Barry's team was a big reason why he was able to get the dub this week. Bench-wise, pretty low-scoring performances from both of these benches. One of the lower-scoring performances I've seen from any teams this week, only 35.2. A lot of single-digit performances on the bench for Joey, which at least means that his starting lineup is doing really solid for him, and he's not going to tinker or have to do any too significant changes to that starting 9. Puka's hurt right now. That's some pretty injury news. Got hurt in Week 1. Going to be missing some time, as is Cooper Kupp. Again, these... I roasted him right after the draft for it, and it still remains true that the Carolina wide receivers are absolute dog water. They lost 26-3 to the Chargers at home, only putting up single-digit fantasy points for each of these two guys. I would say they're drop candidates for Joey at this point through 2 weeks. I would try to go work the waiver wire if I'm Joey and try to pick up some guys like Demarcus Robinson for the Rams, or we can go over the waivers here in just a moment, but some guys like that to fill in for some of the injuries, Juwan Jennings for the 49ers, etc. Going over Bears team, he got the dub this week, 144.2 to 130. Tua is now out, so we have to figure out his quarterback situation. I think Joe Burrow is probably going to wind up being a starter here for a bit. Curious to see if it's just a bench option for Tua. I'd imagine that'd be the case. See if he comes back to play after having these concussions, RIP. Mark Andrews, 9.1. Pretty solid performance from the tight end position. Goddard had 6.8, so pretty much a toss-up week to week right now for those two guys. And then in terms of a trade I want to go over, so made a couple trades this week. But hey, it worked out for me. 193 fantasy points here in week 2. But this was post week 2, just made this morning. I have Ken Walker on my team. His backup is Zach Charbonnet, who had a stellar 17.9 fantasy points, filling in for Ken Walker. So that was enough for me to say, hey, if Ken Walker still continues to miss time, he has a bit of a bleak injury, it'd be nice to have that insurance and have his backup, Zach Charbonnet, to fill in place of Ken Walker in my flex. So I wound up getting him and the Steelers defense, who've had back-to-back double-digit weeks, who've been stellar so far on the defensive side of the ball. Held Denver to 6 points this week, held the Falcons to only 10 points last week, and have the Chargers coming up here in our home opener. So feeling very confident about the Steelers defense. So I got those two guys. Wound up giving him, he needed a bit of help at running back. Pacheco's now hurting out. Did have 16 points this week, but is going to be missing about 6 to 8 weeks. Running back was looking pretty thin and ugly for him. Zamir White on his bench, 6.8 fantasy points. Wound up saying, hey, you know what? I can give you James Conner, who's had 2 really good weeks so far. And my 49ers defense, which just has been pretty lackluster so far. For how talented that side of the ball they are for the 49ers, they're not producing as a defensive unit so far, both back-to-back single-digit weeks, 9 in week 1, 6 in week 2. Meanwhile, the Steelers have put up so far double digits, 15 and 16, I believe, in the first two weeks of our first 2 games of the season. So I felt like that was a pretty even, fair trade. Charbonnet and Steelers defense, I gave him Connor and the 49ers. So that trade is official now. It's not going to show up here on the week 2 scoreboard. It'll be implemented. You'll see that coming up here in week 3. So that's it for the matchups. We'll go over here just in a second the overall standings for the entire league. So let's go to the league homepage. And you can see right now, Brad is in first, the only 2-0 team over here. You have myself in second, 1-1. That is due to the tiebreaker. The tiebreaker is the most points for, essentially. So this might be a better way to look at things. Right here. Okay, so this is a better breakdown. You see season stats. Most points for in the league so far, 313 total points. That is the tiebreaker for the records. So you can see everybody here in the middle. 8 of the 10 teams are 1-1. So very balanced league so far from what I've seen from the performances. And then the tiebreaker, as you can see, goes down and down and down by whoever has the most points. At the moment, I have the most total points in the entire league, and also in current second place. Brad, 2-0 in first. Derek, 0-2 in second. And then everybody else here, 1-1 here in the middle. So it is important when your team does score like my team this past week, 193 fantasy points. It does matter. It could take you from anywhere from being 98-76 all the way up into the top 3 or 4 teams from a week like that. And looking forward to week 3. So that's it for today. There's the playoff percentages. Doesn't really matter too much right now. It's very early in the season. Got another 12 weeks in the regular season to go. And looking forward to the rest of the season. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Take care.